Hey, Amber, it's Karina. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, we are ready to go to start on time.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, it's 10:15, so I think everyone that's here, if you'll just turn on your cameras, that would be great. I'm going to call the Parks and Conservation meeting of March 3rd to order. As is very obvious, we are still in the virtual format. I did have a dream last night that we went back in person in the summer. And so I am really hoping that maybe that is a sign, because I would love to see everyone in person again. So anyway, there are some ways to participate. You can register for the meeting at MissoulaPublicMeetings.com and participate that way. If you are joining us by phone today, use *9 to raise and lower your hand when I call for public comment. If you're not able to join us today or stay on the Zoom call, you can leave a voicemail for all of council on really any topic at 406-552-6012, or leave the full council an email at council@ci.missoula.mt.us. So we appreciate the public participation, and please feel free to use those different ways to contact us. Karina, I'll do a quick roll call, and then we will get to the minutes. Anderson. I think Anderson's coming, but she's not here yet. Becerra.
Present.
Cantos.
Here.
Harp.
Here.
Hess.
Present.
Jones.
Present.
Merritt.
Present.
Ramos, I think he's gone all day, but I'm going to double check. He is not here. I don't anticipate him being here. Cheryl is here. Vasika?
Present.
Van Lossberg? I don't think he's here today either. And then West.
Here.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Let me get to our agenda here. So we have minutes from February 24th to approve. If anyone has any changes to those minutes, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands up, those will stand approved. And now if we're going to take public comment on items that are not on the agenda, but ideally that are related to Parks and Conservation, since this is the Parks and Conservation Committee. We do have 6 attendees, so if any of you would like to raise your hand, and if you're joining by phone, press *9. Okay, I don't see anyone wanting to make public comments, so we will dive right into our agenda here. So today we did a couple of interviews last week for the Open Space Advisory Committee. We did hold that open because we had one more interview to do, but she has decided to actually withdraw her application. So we do have Ann Iverson and Kit Fisher, who we interviewed last week. But in order to appoint them, I need someone to make the motion. Gwen, go ahead.
Thank you. I would be happy to make the motion for both Ms. Iverson and Mr. Fisher. I thought they interviewed well. They bring different things to the table, and we've got 2 slots open and 2 people, so let's do it.
Thank you, Gwen. And I agree. I thought this was going to be a hard process, as it always is when we have less slots available than we have opened. So I would second that. Is there any public comment on this item? Any additional questions or comments from council? I see no hands up. So Karina, would you do a roll call vote on this one for me?
Absolutely. Just one moment here. Sorry about that. Just having a little slight difficulty. Okay, here we go. And Anderson.
Yes.
Anderson votes yes. Becerra?
Yes.
Becerra votes yes. Contos?
Yes.
Contos votes yes. Harp?
Yes.
Harp votes yes. Hess?
Yes.
Hess votes yes. Jones?
Yes.
Jones votes yes. Merritt?
Yes.
Merritt votes yes. Cheryl?
Yes.
Cheryl votes yes. Vaseka?
Yes.
Vaseka votes yes. West?
Yes.
West votes yes. So that is 10 yeses and no nos.
Great. And so that will go on the consent agenda. Thank you to Ann and Kit, and excited to have them on the Open Space Advisory Committee. Our next item is the Clark Fork River Restoration and Access Professional Services Agreement. I am really excited about this one because it was a big part of the Open Space Bond campaign. So I'm excited that we're getting to this point with it to make this a reality for our community. And I will say that our community loved this during the Open Space Bond campaign. So Nathan, I think you're here. Why don't you go ahead and
Sure.
take it from here.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. If I get the right one here. Okay. Can everybody see that and hear me? Okay, so my name is Nathan McLeod. I am the Parks and Trails Design and Development Specialist. And once again, I get to present a really fun project to you guys. So this is the Clark Fork River Restoration and Access Project. What we're going to be asking of you today is to approve a professional services contract with the Respect team in the amount not to exceed $245,616. And so I'll talk a little bit about the project and background now. So for many years, the Clark Fork was a working river. It supported industry, transportation, agriculture, and mining, all of which have left their mark on the river. In recent years, with the removal of Milltown Dam and cleanup of mining waste, there's been a dramatic improvement in water quality, and the Clark Fork River has undergone a renaissance of sorts. So this renaissance is primarily in the form of river recreation. So after many years of neglect, Missoula has now turned to face the river, and both residents and visitors now consider it to be one of our community's greatest assets. In 2018, Parks and Recreation staff, as well as other project partners, conducted several river use surveys where they counted an average of 58 floaters per hour at the Madison Street footbridge. These were done on warm summer days. And this doesn't include the many people that are accessing the river from other points. So folks that are going down to the river to put their feet in the water, to go swimming, to throw a ball for their dogs, or just to view the river from the trails. So out of this newfound love of the river, there has been a new potential threat. With dramatic increase in recreational use, particularly in the urban stretch of Missoula, there's been a lot of significant erosion problems. And so as you can see from these images, most of this erosion is due to people walking down the banks of the river, creating trails, accessing beaches, or coming off the river with tubes and boats. So this erosion is threatening water quality. It is trampling vegetation and causing habitat problems. And then also, if you look at this image in the upper right, the erosion's getting so bad that it's actually starting to threaten existing infrastructure such as the Milwaukee Trail. So we know people are using the river in heavy numbers. In our PROS survey, the Parks, Recreation, Trails, and Open Space Needs Assessment from 2018, we found that river access sites were among the top 5 desired improvements. In fact, 81% of people wanted river access sites, and 88% of people wanted to restore the river or streams and other lakes and natural habitats. In 2014, a community-wide river visioning process was launched. This included participation from multiple agencies and stakeholders, and everyone agreed that river access and stream bank health were really important issues that needed to be addressed. Following this process, in 2015, the City of Missoula, Water Quality Department, and the Clark Fork River Coalition secured funding and hired the Respect team to evaluate and categorize riverbank and riparian conditions along the south bank of the Clark Fork River through downtown Missoula. So this map shows some of the findings from that process. So I'll start with just describing that scope. So they pretty much looked at the river from California Street along the south bank of the river up to Madison Street. In this next round of planning and design work, we're expanding the scope. So we're going to be looking at the river from Riverside Park, which is just west of Russell Street, including both the south and the north banks of the river, all the way up to Ben Hughes Park in East Missoula. So it's a significantly larger stretch of river that we're going to be looking at, but a lot of the same issues are presenting themselves along that larger stretch. And so this map shows proposed riverbank restoration sites, as well as proposed river access improvements. So in addition to that map and site selection criteria, the team created conceptual level river access and restoration treatments. And these images show these different types of access improvements. So the one on the bottom left is showing an example of what a rock stairway, stair steps might look like leading to the river. The middle image is showing a concept for a small beach that's been restored and includes trail access to the beach. This is really common, especially along that south bank of the river in downtown Missoula at lower waters. The upper right image is a little bit more of an intensive design, and this is a design for Tool Park, which is a really heavily used access point, primarily with tubers, using it as a takeout. And one of the reasons for this is that there is free parking nearby and there's a restroom right next to this spot. And so we found that a lot of people are using this site because of those amenities. This lower right image shows an example of what a concept could be for under the Higgins Avenue Bridge. We could create hardened access that actually provides an accessible route down to the water. So in addition to access improvements, the planning documents include bank stabilization and habitat restoration concepts. These were more of prescription level designs that could be utilized for a variety of sites that may be showing a variety of different erosion severity. So, you know, some of these images, the erosion is really extreme, and some of them it's not very bad. And so the prescriptive approach to bank stabilization allows us to kind of design as we go for different sites. So this image, doesn't this make you ready for summer? Especially with the sunshine today. This is that concept for the Toole Park River access. And so you can see the restroom right here next to this, which is, I think, one of the major draws for this site. This is an image from the North Riverside Parks and Trails Master Plan, which was just recently adopted. This is at Caris Park and is a concept showing ADA access down to the river. One thing that we have heard from people over and over again is that they love to be able to see the river, but it's really difficult to get down to the water. And this is especially true in the urban center of Missoula, where the banks are levees, they're very steep, and it's hard for people to get down there. And so providing access for seniors and children and folks with mobility impairments is a really important goal for this project. So moving forward, this spring we put out a request for qualifications. We found the RESPECT team was selected as the most qualified team to take the conceptual plans created in 2016 and develop the designs into a 100% bid-ready permitted project. The goals for this project are to inventory and monitor riverbank erosion and identify user-made access locations along the river, to create and affirm the site selection criteria for riverbank restoration and/or access enhancements that was developed in 2015, to design and construct an intuitive system of walk-in river access points for a variety of river users, which encourages responsible recreation and promotes the health and aesthetics of the Clark Fork, and to design and implement a restoration program to sustainably restore impacted riverbank locations throughout the project area and potentially beyond.
Hey, Nathan.
Yeah.
Do you want questions to be asked as you move along in this project, or wait for the end? Because I know that we have one counselor that has a question.
Oh, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, Heidi, go ahead. I see your hand up. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks. So Mike, you mentioned levies, and so I was wondering what level of coordination there is, I guess, between the remapping process of the levees and the floodplains and this project, since it deals with both the north and the south side of the riverbank. I could see there being not necessarily conflict, but like the need for coordination. If you could just
so Missoula Stormwater folks are primarily involved in that, from my understanding, and they are partners in this project. So like Tracy Campbell and Andy Schultz are involved in this project. They have mentioned that specific thing, that the levies are, getting reevaluated. And so that's something that we need to keep in mind for the project. One thing that I think is important to point out is, permitting could make or break a project like this. And so we're going to be involving the permitting agencies really early on in this project to make sure that, what we're designing is going to get permitted. The other nice thing about this project in particular is that we are not doing any improvements within the stream. So all the improvements are on the bank, which should dramatically influence the level of permitting that we need to go through. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I know that I've been sitting in on the levy group for several months now, and I just know that there aren't any official results yet, but they will be coming, sometime this summer.
Mhm.
Just to keep that line of communication open so that this is the best possible project, I think is important. So
Yeah, appreciate that.
And we have one more question now. The
go
questions
ahead.
lead to more questions is the issue. But go ahead, Julie. Go ahead and ask your question. Thanks.
Thanks. Something that Nathan just said sparked a question for me about the permitting. I mean, so we're not planning to do any work in the stream bed, but this work will still occur within the high water marks of the stream on the banks, won't it?
Yes, yeah, it will. There's definitely there's a fair amount of permitting that will be required. And I have a list of what we anticipate those permits to be. The Respect team is really well qualified for this. They've had a lot of experience working with those permitting agencies and have been working on this exact project in the past too. And so I think they have a really good feel for what's going to be required.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know those guys, they definitely have done plenty of stream bank permitting projects. So I appreciate that.
Okay, no more hands are up, so go ahead.
Okay, so project funding. So the funding for this project is primarily going to be coming from the 2018 Missoula County Open Space Bond. The bond measure included up to $1.5 million for development of sustainable river access and riparian restoration along the Clark Fork within the open space planning boundaries. Of that 1.5 million, 225,000 was allocated for phase 1 of the Clark Fork River Restoration and Access Project to develop the construction-ready and permitted designs. The remaining bond funds will be leveraged with other potential sources and will be used for construction. So this contract is in an amount not to exceed $245,616. $198,080 of that is for the design and engineering. That will get us to that 100% bid-ready project. There's an optional $47,536 that is for construction administration and project bidding. This would only be utilized if and when we go to construction. And because this project is such, it's 4 miles of river with a lot of individual sites, it's unlikely that we're going to be doing the entire thing at once. And so probably what's going to happen is we'll be picking a few specific sites to start with. And so we'll be using some amount of that 47,000 for construction administration, but that's all still to be determined based on favorable estimates and fundraising as we move forward. So next steps on the project, pending your approval, obviously, we do have a public process that we've outlined continuation of the public process. From March 9th through the 31st, we plan to hold a virtual open house. This is going to utilize Engage Missoula. We already have an Engage Missoula site developed with a survey that's all ready to go that we can launch as soon as we have a contract. So that'll be a 3-week comment period where we're going to really get the word out to the community to try to come in, see what the project is, and give us their feedback. Following that, we'll have a series of stakeholder meetings that are more targeted stakeholders in the project. Then we'll go into design, and around 60% design development, we plan to have another open house in the fall of this year. That's where we'll go back to the public and ask them, are we headed in the right direction? Is this, do you concur that this is the type of project that you wanted to see? Following that, we'll do more stakeholder meetings, making sure that we're engaging with the permitting agencies throughout the process. We should have a design project by the end of this year. We're going to be doing fundraising throughout the process, and we hope to begin construction on at least some of the sites in the late summer of 2022, as soon as the water level drops enough that we can start to work on the side of the river. So that is all I have. And yeah, if there's more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks. That's great. I'm really excited about this. I just want to add a couple things and then I'll go to counselor questions. But, I think that this is a great project for a lot of reasons. But I think in a an area that has such high recreational use. It's really important to take care of that natural resource that we love and not love it to death. And so I think just balancing heavy recreation, water quality, bank stability, public safety, all of that. This is really an important project. I also, having been intimately involved in both the language and the projects around the open space bond, I can tell you that that this stretch of river and this type of project was why we included capital improvement projects on existing open space land in the bond language. So we knew from the survey that this was really important, and the survey that the county, our Parks Department did. So anyway, that's why I'm so excited that you're here and this is moving forward. I've been kind of wondering where it was. I have a couple questions for you, Nathan. And I saw some numbers on this, and actually Five Valleys Land Trust, when I was with them, participated in some of the boater counts. But so at 58 floaters per hour, can you extrapolate that to like how many people are floating and climbing in and out of the river in a week, in a month? I mean, I knew those numbers at some point and I just can't remember them. And then, yeah, I'll ask the next question after you, if you can answer that.
You know, I don't have that information right now. I think that we have done some of that extrapolation to, you know, total users counted during the period of the day. I don't know what it is, but it is a lot. There's a lot of people using the river.
Yeah, that's okay. And I don't need that because we can always extrapolate ourselves, but I did see those numbers at some point, and we talked about them a lot in the open space bond campaign, and they were really actually astounding, to the point that every time I would drive over a bridge, I would kind of look and kind of try to see how many people were in the river. My other question, and then Sandy, I see your hands up, so I'll get to you next, is when you say the stakeholders, do you guys have a list of those stakeholders in mind? Is that finished? I mean, I imagine there are a lot of recreation and conservation groups that are going to be interested in participating in this.
Yeah, we do. We've started that. It's not completely finalized yet. Basically, we're going to have several categories of meetings. So one of them is going to be more of like community partners. And so that's where we're going to try to engage with folks from the Downtown Missoula Partnership, potentially bringing in certain downtown businesses that might want to be involved. Clark Fork Coalition is a group that's really involved in this project. Even Five Valleys Land Trust, we'd like to get them involved as well. So that's kind of like community partners. Another category is river recreation. So this would be like your river recreation businesses, the trailhead, different fishing guides or guide groups. Another group is more of a technical advisory group, and this would be for permitting. So the different permitting agencies, FWP, City Missoula Engineering, Parks Maintenance staff, all those folks that are really going to be involved in that kind of day-to-day technical work along the river. And then also we have kind of a more general technical group that would involve like transportation. So looking at the MPO and other planning organizations around transportation. Transportation is really important in this because people are floating down the river and they're taking out at a lot of these locations. And so how does that work with the overall transportation system is something that we think is really important to look at. And so there's, the list could go on forever with stakeholders. And so we want to make sure that these meetings are rather targeted. And so we're going to be getting the word out about Engage Missoula and sending that really broadly so that a lot of folks can provide their feedback on that website.
That's great. And obviously it's always good to, that sounds like a really comprehensive list. It's obviously good to get people's feedback at the beginning rather than them coming around. And then the one person that you didn't mention that maybe is already on your list, that our organization that I would suggest including is Trout Unlimited.
Yep, they're on our list.
I figured they probably were. Okay, thank you. So I'll take council questions now. If there's more than Sandy, start queuing up. Sandy, go ahead.
Thanks. And thanks, Nathan, for the presentation.
I was curious, once all this is implemented, where will the maintenance funds come from? Will they come from the open space bonds as well, or will it be entered into the regular parks budget?
You know, I actually don't know the answer to that question. I'm guessing that it's primarily will be through park maintenance budget. I imagine that when these sites are developed, the maintenance costs will actually go down, because right now the erosion is so severe in some areas that it's very difficult to deal with. How do you deal with that erosion? And so once the access sites are hardened and the vegetation is restored, there shouldn't be as much maintenance required.
Okay, great.
I would add to that, Sandy, that, you know, the writing of the stewardship levy that we added, that we ran and passed along with the open space bond, that's a possible funding source as well. I mean, I love the fact that possibly that price tag would go down, but there are other sources as well. Did you have a follow-up?
Oh, I was just going to make the recommended motion.
Oh,
and
okay.
Speak to it if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. As many of you know, I'm not a big fan of the open space bonds, but the voters did speak and they did pass. And the river banks absolutely are eroding, and I think this is very necessary. And as a frequent user of the rivers myself, I think this is a great project. So I will be supporting this motion. I think it's a great idea, and that was a really good presentation. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Sandy. We do have a motion on the floor, but I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna take questions and comments as we go along here. So Heather, go ahead.
Thanks. Nathan, I was wondering if there are certain sections of this riverfront project that are prioritized. And the section that comes to mind is on the south bank of the Clark Fork between Orange Street and Higgins. Because I know that's an area that really has really deteriorated, and wondering if that's a priority or if there's something else that comes to mind first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, I think our priorities as to how we're going to implement that are things that we're still developing, and will come out of this project. One of the reasons that we're having that Engage Missoula open house is that we're going to be asking the community what their priorities are as well. And so I think some of what we're going to find from that survey is there's going to be a few areas that are going to come out as like, this is probably the first thing that we should be working on. With some of that work in that particular section that you're mentioning between Orange Street and Higgins, some of the erosion is not very severe yet. And so a lot of the bank restoration we could actually do in-house. So we could use parks maintenance staff to do some of the kind of the easier treatments, which may be as simple as just closing off a trail that's starting to develop and let the banks heal themselves, or planting a couple plants. And so, some of the prioritization is going to be based on like, what are we able to do in-house versus what are we going to have to contract out?
Thanks, Nathan. I, like Sandy, support this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Julie?
I thank you, Nathan, for bringing this today. And I've supported this project as it has been brought to us before. But my husband works for RESPEC, and because of that, I will be abstaining from voting. But no doubt, I know that this is a very needed project, and I'm very happy to see it moving forward.
Thanks, Julie. Stacy?
Thanks so much. I have a question and a comment if allowed. My question is, you had mentioned that the construction timeline to start would be the sort of receding of high water in the summer of 2022. And do you have a timeline beyond that in terms of, is this a phased plan, or is the speccing that we're hoping to do for all of it and to get it all done that summer? Or I don't know. I apologize if you went through that, but I didn't catch.
Okay. No, not in very much detail. I didn't. So I would love to say that we're going to do the whole 4 miles of river at one go, but I don't think that that's realistic funding wise. It's going to be a pretty expensive project. Some of these sites are going to be more expensive than others. As I mentioned before, I think prioritization is going to be based on not only what people are telling us that they want to see, you know, what the public is saying, like, hey, this is the most important access site to all of us. But also it's going to be, what are we going to be able to implement in-house? So some of those restoration treatments we're going to be able to do with just a couple of maintenance staff. So I think it's kind of hard to know exactly where we're going to go after this first construction season. But I think it's going to be a phased approach over time, similar to what we've done with the North Riverside Parks and Trails Master Plan. It's going to be opportunistic. So, you know, for example, we might be doing some sort of construction in some area. We might have an opportunity to implement part of this project with another project.
Absolutely great. I appreciate that. I just didn't know if I missed that part. And Madam Chair, can I quickly make a comment?
Of course.
Yeah. As my fellow council members, I'm also very supportive of this. I am an avid user of the river, and I know, you know, it's one of the, you know, unique gems that living in Missoula provides for us, but we definitely are loving our river to death. And I really appreciate the fact that you are trying to think about making sure that it's not just able-bodied folks like myself who want to float the river, who want to be able to access it. And, you know, water is an important component of our lives, and being able just to sit peacefully there and drink a cup of coffee, even when you're not wanting to float. I really applaud you for sort of thinking about all members of our community and their abilities to access this. And I'm excited to see how this all comes to fruition. So thank you for all your hard work, and I'm excited to see all of this coming together.
Thanks, Stacy. I would agree. There's, in fact, there was an image that I didn't see in previous years with additional ADA access sites. So I was excited to see that as well. I do not see any other council people's hands up. So I am going, we have a motion on the floor. I'm going to go to public comments. So we do have some attendees. If there's someone on the phone, so you need, again, you need to press *9 if you want to raise your hand. But if you are in attendance and you would like to make public comment on this item, raise your hand. I do not see anyone raising their hands. So Karina, you want to go ahead and take a roll call vote on this?
Yep. Here we go. Anderson.
Yes.
Anderson votes yes. Becerra.
Yes.
Becerra votes yes. Contos.
Yes.
Contos votes yes. Harp.
Yes.
Harp votes yes. Hess.
Yes.
Hess votes yes. Jones.
Yes.
Jones votes yes. Merritt.
Abstain.
Merritt abstains. Cheryl.
Yes.
Cheryl votes yes. Viseca.
Yes.
Viseca votes yes. West.
Yes.
West votes yes. So that is 9 yeses, no nos, and 1 abstain.
Great, thank you. And that will go on our consent agenda as well. And Nathan, thanks so much. It was fun to hear an update, and it, to me, was a really exciting thing to approve. So
Thank you.
Bye-bye. We are moving on to 3.3, which is the Missoula City Cemetery Strategic Plan. And I think, Jeremy, you are here, and I'll hand it off to you if you're here. Wait, are you here?
Thank you. Good morning. Jeremy Keene. I'm the Director for Public Works and Mobility. Could you also promote William Stone into the meeting? He's our presenter.
Karina, will you do that? I don't know if I can. Can I do that?
Hey, Jeremy, I think I made it.
Okay. Sounds like Will's in.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So the Missoula City Cemetery is part of the Public Works and Mobility Department, and we worked with a consultant from LF Sloan Group to help us prepare a strategic plan for the future operation of the cemetery. And this was also funded with assistance from the Missoula Redevelopment Agency. And the plan evaluates infrastructure condition and needs, identifies long-term land needs for the cemetery, looks at community values of the cemetery, both as an operating cemetery as well as the historic values and the value as a green space. And finally, it provides some actionable steps for us to ensure that the cemetery continues to remain relevant and sustainable in our community. So the plan was created with input from staff, the cemetery board, lot owners, and local funeral industry professionals. And we presented the plan to the Missoula Redevelopment Agency Board in the fall, and we presented final revisions to the Missoula Cemetery Board on February 18th, and they recommended approval of the plan. So we're bringing that here to you today. We have our consultant, Will Sloan, and he'll take us through what is in the plan and the recommendations. And I just want to thank Will and Larry Sloan for their work on this. They did an excellent job, really brought a lot of good insight and expertise around cemetery, and were very patient with us as we struggled through some of the difficulties with COVID and being able to create a plan during that time. So thanks, Will, and go right ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. Larry is here as well, so he's gonna chime in on a whole bunch of this as the aged veteran of our team. He'll bring lots of good knowledge, and you'll want to hear from him. I just want to start by saying thank you all for taking the time to talk about this. Cemeteries are not always on the top of the agenda as a discussion item, and while Larry and I spend every day thinking about them, it's a unique element of a community, and frankly, we see it as a resource that obviously there's a core element of it, but we see it as being able to be relevant in other ways, and we'll talk about that. I really don't want to spend too much time kind of reiterating what's in our report, but I think it's important to hear some of the context that came from our recommendations and for our recommendations. But feel free to ask questions as we go. We're happy to stop and discuss anything in more detail we can. We had it was a pleasure to get to know the cemetery board. They're a very, very dedicated group. To meet with lot owners, to meet with community members, to understand how this fits within the community. And I think we have a pretty good handle on that at this point, and we hope that our recommendations will only enhance that. So what we're gonna do is Larry's gonna start by talking about sort of the national trends. I'll dive a little bit down into Montana so you can get some core elements of what informed what we were doing. And then from there, we'll discuss the recommendations themselves, specifically the excess land, which I think is a major topic that the board is interested in trying to come to a conclusion on. So Larry, if you're on, we'll make it happen.
Certainly. Again, reiterating what Will said, we really enjoyed getting to know Missoula and seeing this wonderful community. And the cemetery is a very special place in the city, although in a rather unique location. All cemeteries in the United States today are facing serious headwinds as our trends in mortality change. And the Missoula Cemetery is affected by these trends. When I started serving cemeteries in the 70s, the cremation rate in the United States was less than 5%. Today, it's at 55% nationally. And in the state of Montana, it's at 75%. So literally 3 in 4 families that are experiencing a death in the community today do not need a cemetery today, which is a complete change from the 1970s. The 1980s, 1990s. This is a relatively evolving thing, and we predict that it will go to 85% within the next 10 years, and more or less top out at about that level. In addition to the increase in cremation and the question of whether you need to use a cemetery at all, we have the issues of changing lifestyles. In retirement today, people have mobility, which didn't really exist for prior generations. The children, your children, my children, are not living in the same community. After college, they're moving to cities and to other places. So you have a difference in what type of memorialization and lot you might select for your family. And then you have issues like broken marriages and fractured families because of that, and how that affects this very emotional issue of cemeteries and funeral services. These trends combined, are making us, when we are serving our historic cemetery clients and our not-for-profit clients, our religious clients, to look at the cemetery to try to make sure that it is a very relevant place where I would want to take my parents' cremated remains or my children's cremated remains, and as I would have historically with a casketed burial. And so, we're doing lots of things that we're going to get to in this report. And what we want you to understand that in this context is how we looked at what land you have at the cemetery. And I know, Will, you're going to talk about the property now.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen briefly. I don't want to spend too much time, but from a trend perspective, Montana is a growing place. Missoula is a growing place. So we unfortunately see deaths going up, but we see cremation going up at a really significant way. And so as we looked at the cemetery, the first thing we had to do was understand it from a financial perspective. And so what we did was we looked at cemetery revenues over the last 10 years. You can see from this chart that they are going up, which is a terrific thing from a reducing the subsidies required from the taxpayer. And importantly, cremation burial has been increasingly selected, increasingly used within the city cemetery. The challenge that we see, and this is not uncommon to municipal cemeteries, is that if I were to add expenses into this chart, you would see that they are around $600,000 a year over the last 2 years. And so you basically have a $500,000 shortfall surplus that's required to maintain the cemetery annually. Again, this is not uncommon. The cemetery is providing services at a lower cost to its community members. It's providing an important service. It's a green space. It exists as more than just a cemetery. But we do have to look at that as we start to consider the financial aspects and the intensity of use of the cemetery today. And so the big question I think that we began with was looking at the use of the cemetery. And statistically, if you look at it, the cemetery today is doing about 35 full body burials a year, about 20 cremation burials a year. That is, in our estimation, capturing about 8% of the cremation marketplace within the cemetery service area, and about 13% of the full body burial marketplace within the marketplace. And so you have this challenge where you're not capturing a large market share, you're offering it at a lower cost, and you're subsidizing that. And in addition to that, you've also developed a new area of the cemetery. So looking at this map, the blue area is the historic cemetery. Primarily, this triangle was originally purchased in 1884 from the railroad. Then expanded into this northern section, which you can see is heavily treed and actually much more mature area. And then over the course of the next 100 years, this area was developed, which is much more new and has not matured as significantly, creating a much larger burial inventory than frankly Larry or I expected when we came into the site. And so as we began to look at this excess 30 acres, which is in green, we had to do it in the context that you are providing a relatively small number of burials annually. And you have, 7,000 unused graves today and about 350 unused niches today. So as we did our analysis, we came to the conclusion that there's over 200 years of active life remaining as the site exists today. And given the trends that we see, that could be significantly longer. So we had to then evaluate this excess land area from the perspective of use and protection of the site, which is very important to us. We really, we love cemeteries. We enjoy the context of the cemetery. This is a very unique space surrounded by such an heavy industrial use. And so it's our goal to protect the cemetery for generations to come, for landowners that have chosen it and will choose it. And Gwen, looks like you have a question. I'd be happy to take a second now if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead, Gwen.
Thanks. I just want to make sure I'm clear on what you're saying. As I'm looking at this graph, there's the blue or purplish section and the green section. You're saying that if we extrapolate 200 years out, that all could be used within the purplish blue section?
Correct. Yeah, sorry, I should have picked a cleaner color, purple or blue, but I agree with you. Yes, the developed areas you have that exist not only here, but inside the historic sections total about 7,000 unused graves, which should give you over 200 years of life. And that's without really, frankly, looking at any future trending. That's a purely clean analysis using today's rates.
Thank you.
Jordan, go ahead.
Thanks. This is really interesting, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. And I think you might have said this, and maybe I missed it. But what is the acreage of those two different colors?
It's an 80-acre total site. We estimate that about 50 acres have been developed and or could be developed in the immediate kind of vicinity. This 30-acre parcel is really the excess land.
Okay, perfect.
And so I think the next step for us was, oh, I'm sorry, Stacy, please.
Madam Chair, is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Stacy.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't mean to reiterate the question that Jordan, just by for clarity's sake. So the 30 acres is in green and the 50 acres is in purple. And the purple area should, at current trends, last within 200 years life, which is an interesting phraseology in cemetery speak. Yes. But I appreciate, just wanted to make sure I'm tracking on the points.
Yes, you are completely correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry if I went too quickly on that. But the challenge for us now is, Larry and I look at cemeteries, obviously we look at them in perpetuity. This is not a site that is going to move. It is a site that will be there forever. It's very important that it be maintained that way. With that in mind, it's hard for us to project 20 years versus 50 versus 100. So as we say, there's 200 years of life. That really is as far as we would ever want to build out a cemetery, if not further. So as we looked at the remaining land, we really needed to protect the existing site. And that was our goal. And that's where sort of these next set of recommendations came out of. So what we did was we broke it down into 3 particular areas. We see this red area as a utility buffer. There's currently a pump station which operates the irrigation on the site that's located within this, what's called the bullpen area here. We think that by extending that down, you'll allow for a clean buffer that would reduce any potential impact from development. And then we also see this orange area, which today is used for multiple purposes, but it is in essence open space, as a unique space that could be developed in conjunction with other city departments or for the purposes of the cemetery. And I'll let Larry speak to that in a minute. But realistically, we see the remaining land as being able to be divested without impacting the site negatively, and still allowing it to have the kind of life and engagement with the community that I think should be the goals as you move forward. So Larry, do you want to speak to what you see sort of as the benefits of potentially this plan?
Yeah, the board, the cemetery board over a number of years bought these parcels. Our understanding is they had hoped to eventually link with the Catholic cemetery, which is further to the east, and that this would be sort of like a giant cemetery area in perpetuity. That never happened. The Catholic diocese has actually sold portions of land that they previously acquired. And I believe there's a desire on the community's part to increase the residential development in this part of the city. So one of the tasks we were given was tell us how much land can we take and use for an alternative purpose, and then how do we do that? And when you're talking about having 200 years of inventory, you obviously could take much more land than we're recommending because you don't need to plan. It's just unrealistic to plan for 200 years into the future. But we believe that if you cut the site at that red line, that you're creating a cemetery that can be preserved in that manner. And in the process, we're hoping that there'll be discussion with the precast concrete people on the corner to possibly do some land swapping or something that would get them out of that place. And we did ask them to take the barbed wire off their fence and they declined. I don't know what we're saving with the barbed wire. I guess people are not wanting to fear that their precast concrete products are going to be stolen or something. I don't quite get it. But we see that the cemetery board invested in this land. And so now if it's going to be given to the city or alternative agencies for an alternative use like residential, that we're hoping that the cemetery would get some benefit from it financially. And that financial benefit could be used to protect the cemetery and to improve some issues that exist. In the cemetery, there's a small chapel which is just not functional. You can't heat it. It's just an unpleasant space. It's not utilized. The office is an old house that's a brick building that really doesn't work as an office. It doesn't really have handicap access. There's a residence in it, an apartment that you really don't need a resident living in a cemetery. That's a trend of a bygone era. And so we were hoping that possibly a new building could be constructed that would be an office and chapel and possibly indoor columbarium inventory for those selecting cremation as a step in the memorial process. So, that building, I think, could be located in that green area just above the orange area and create a contact as you enter the cemetery. And then to further protect the cemetery from the visual images that you see when you're in the cemetery looking out, and when you're out of the cemetery looking in, we would like to see the north edge of the cemetery have enhanced landscape to hide the industrial use that's above it. And on the west border, we would like to see some sort of privacy type of fence that could be erected there, some very permanent structure that would block your view into that industrial site. And then probably the most controversial subject would be the frontage on cemetery, on the main artery there. My initial recommendation was that we remove the fence and not have a fence. That met with considerable resistance. So as in our report, it's being categorized as still being studied. But we believe it either should be an ornamental fence that is attractive and inviting, or no fence, which clearly invites you into the site and the beautiful landscape that you have in that end of the cemetery. I mean, your tree inventory there is spectacular, and we think that that's a much more inviting image than rather than a chain link fence that's been hit and dented and needs painted. And so we would like to see that has to be a part of what comes out of the land exchange, if that's possible.
I have a quick question. What were some of the concerns expressed around removal of that front fence?
I think most people have an image that cemetery should be fenced. The old joke of it's fenced so you can keep people from getting out. I think that the fence also creates a barrier to what people perceive as a concern for vandalism. And we don't see any historic vandalism at this site. There's no children riding bikes between school and home. They're running through the cemetery. This is a highly industrial site. We don't see the value of having a fence, but people that would want the fence would be for having a barrier of entry and security.
Thanks.
Yeah, and frankly, it's something that we encounter in many cemeteries. We work with cemeteries that are inside of urban communities in Toledo, in Detroit, in Flint, Michigan, in Orlando, Florida, and we make this recommendation. It's often met with concern, to say the least, and we've just seen when you actually take the step, the reality is this fence is not keeping anyone out if they want to come in today. And so, it creates a more opening, welcoming space that we believe deeply in after seeing it work in other communities. But you can also do other things to enhance the edge, from plantings to a smaller scale fence that would be just as inviting in many ways and provide a great middle ground opportunity. So with that in mind, the last thing I would just like to speak to is just sort of the relevancy aspect, and then we'll open it up to any questions that we can answer. Cemeteries are challenging places because people have a very specific view of them. I'm sorry, if there's a question, I'm happy to stay on this subject. Okay, and so what we try to do is make it more than just a cemetery. And Larry spoke about the trees. We really view this as a site that could be certified potentially as an arboretum, and that could use that to enhance its profile and to bring in more interested groups. We see birding in cemeteries as a very common activity and something that brings people to the site. The city's done a tremendous job with a program called Stories of Stones that many of you may be familiar with. It seems like it was a really neat program, and we hope that they will continue to do it in conjunction with the history signs and some of the other programs that they're doing. If the resources allow, we think those are things that they should continue to invest in. And, it's really a staff time challenge more than anything else. And that is always the case. And so it's a question of if they have those resources. But if you can, we think that people will engage with the cemetery. And as they do, they'll realize that it's not this, purely solemn place. It can be more than that. It can be, a green space that's valuable for other things. And at the same time exists as this place of remembrance and of the history of the community for those that choose to have it be that. So we see dual purposes, and we hope that can be continued to be explored as you go through this next phase of the cemetery's life, and as the city continues to decide where it fits within the structure and how they'd like to address this larger land question. So, Larry, is there anything I missed?
No, the only other thing is the idea of having the cemetery be the most relevant space is the only way you're going to get people with cremated remains to bring them to the cemetery and to have that life recorded and preserved in Missoula's history. And so we also talked in our report about inventory types and things we could do, like doing some road closures in the older sections where they're most desirable spaces for people to purchase new lots. And I would call your attention to those sections of our report, because the whole idea of relevance is critical. If 85% of the people in 10 years are being cremated and they're not coming to the cemetery, then it really kind of loses a lot of its purpose. And you're not capturing today's history for people to view tomorrow, which impacts that as well. So, we feel like the key thing is to be thinking about how we keep it relevant. And we think this cemetery is just spectacular. It's just, unfortunately, it's in a place that's difficult, and you're in a trend that's just not a comfortable place to be for cemeteries.
Thank you. That it's really interesting just to hear kind of what's happening other places too. And we are a growing city, so who knows what different areas are going to look like as we move forward. I have a queue of questions from counselors. So Heather, why don't you start?
Thanks, Amber. Thank you for this presentation. Larry, William, this was really highly informative, and you really shed some light on the history of cemeteries, which frankly, I never thought twice about. So to think about how our communities have, with mobility, have changed really helps to, I think, lay that context of making a wise decision here. I think when I look at that map and how your recommendation is still to honor the past, and I think that's really key, and yet open it up to the recognition that our community is desperately changing and growing. I can't help but note that the section that you're looking to divest is just north of the Scott Street project. And I'm wondering if one of you could talk to how that could play out in a residential format going forward, and what connections there are in terms of building more housing.
I actually, Jeremy, if you're willing to speak to that, maybe that's as much a question for you as anyone, given your expertise. The only thing that I would add, just as context, is we reviewed carefully MRA's master plan for that area. And we think that the master plan was very well thought out. There's a lot of opportunity for development on its face. It's not our expertise, frankly. But the one context of the item that we held sacred was we would like to keep access to the site as it is today. So there's not a road that goes into the site from the east. We'd like to see that border protected and allow just the central access point so that they can be totally separate as a space, even if maybe there's walking or biking trails or other pathways in and out of the site. But from a vehicular standpoint, that was the one element we looked at. And Jeremy, I'll leave it to you to expand.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think with some of those caveats, I think a residential neighborhood could be a good neighborhood, a good neighbor to the cemetery, and it does fit well with the redevelopment plan for the area. And I think our question with the master plan was, what are the cemetery's long-term needs? And this plan that the Sloan Group has put together helps us answer that question. And now we can start to think about what can happen with that surplus land.
Thanks. Gwen.
Thanks. Great presentation and really interesting stuff here. And I first of all just want to comment that I totally agree with kind of having a culture shift of opening the cemetery up, having it be a space that more people enjoy. It is spectacularly beautiful. I've been out there, and I've been out there for the Stories and Stones. They usually have it in October. The leaves are turning. If it's a bright, beautiful autumn day, it's simply striking. And it's a fascinating day to walk around and hear all of the stories. And in the back of my mind, I have a vision of somehow taking that history piece a little bit further and having a walking tour with plaques next to some of the really cool tombstones so that people could interact on more than just 1 or 2 days every year with the history out there and have a self-guided tour. So I'll just put that one on the shelf, and maybe our historic preservation officer can figure that out when we get one. But I agree, more interaction in such a beautiful place is warranted. And a couple of questions. First, with the area just south of where the current infrastructure is that you're proposing as kind of the excess piece if needed in the future. I'm not sure, did you talk about potential uses for that? I mean, over the years, there's just been a lot of talk about, gosh, this could be great soccer, lacrosse playing fields, that kind of thing, which would be great next to residential, yet still provide a buffer. And did you contemplate uses, or did I miss that in the presentation?
No, we very much did. I don't think we touched on as much as we probably should have, frankly, so I'm glad you asked the question. In talking with Jeremy and talking with the other city staff, it became clear that I think there are opportunities for cross-development for different organizations to play a role in this site as they do today. The excess land is used by multiple agencies. So it's not, I think we see it as expanding the avenues of what could be done there. Soccer, some kind of passive recreation, or active recreation could certainly fit in that space, in the short term. And then in the medium and long term, you could explore potentially building a building, doing some engagement that's different than that. I think the options, frankly, are a bit limitless, just depending upon how the decision is made to retain that land. And I think that's the key element of our recommendation. And then I think how you screen it and how you make it relative to the cemetery, because when you come through that main gate, somebody's going to look to the right and see a soccer game and not be pleased about it when they come into the cemetery. And we know that reality. And so how you plan that, intelligently is the key.
And if I could add a couple of points, there is an issue that needs to be at some point addressed of whether this should remain in Jeremy's portfolio or whether this should be moved to parks and shared services of lawn care and equipment. And I think there's some financial opportunities there that we could look at if you were to look at that. The second thing is if you look at the top of the red line and you draw it across to where the maintenance building is, that whole area could have an alternative use, because you could always convert it back to cemetery space if you didn't want the ball fields anymore. And there's a number of cities that have used excess cemetery land for recreational purposes. And it is really a good complementary use.
Thank you. Follow up, Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. I totally agree. It's there's a lot of emotions tied to cemeteries and expectations. So it is a delicate dance. And I kind of always come back to if something's done with respect, I think that's the key underpinning for how to successfully possibly expand the use out there. But that's something for down the road. But it is a delicate approach on the whole thing. But my second question is kind of about infrastructure. My understanding is that there is not an underground water system irrigation sprinklers at the cemetery. It's basically done by hand, which is very labor intensive, but they've done such a great job. That's why we have such a fantastic forest out there at this point. The cost benefit analysis, is it possible to put in underground sprinklers with all of the roots? Is it not possible? Like, where are we at on that issue after, if you guys analyzed it?
The irrigation system functions as it is, and it's not that labor intensive in terms of a cost center to warrant trying to do something different. The problem we have with doing something different is kind of a different angle on this. We're always looking at cemeteries as, what are our liabilities? What do we have to fund in the future? And if I put in a PVP pipe system with irrigation, in 20 to 30 years, I'm gonna need to replace it. So you don't just do it once, you do it twice or 3 times or 4 times. So we're constantly looking at it from that perspective of, if I remove a road, I don't have to resurface it. I don't have to, I'm good at grass cutting. So I think in the short term for sure, and I believe in the long term, that you're going to want to continue to have some labor and do that manual process rather than taking on the challenge of injuring tree roots and going through burial areas and creating a sprinkling system that then needs to be maintained and has cost related to it.
Great, thank you, very helpful, appreciate it.
I was muted, sorry. Heidi, go ahead, and then I would love to get a motion on the floor so we can move on to public comment, since we have one other item today as well.
So I just have a couple comments and then one question. I know I'm not going to say anything that Jeremy especially doesn't know, but I think one of the really challenging things being a neighbor of the site is it's hard to get to as a pedestrian. And I think that is something that could really improve it as a existing resource for neighbors. It's a great place to walk. I go here fairly frequently, but I'm less likely, for example, to take my kids just because if we're walking there, it's not exactly the safest space, especially when you're like walking past a bunch of trash trucks or big 18-wheelers that are on the road. My question is about, I guess, maybe like trends we can expect nationally when it comes to burials. I know in some European countries where land, of course, is a little bit more limited when compared to population, burials aren't permanent. Where I think, in Germany, I think people get a burial site for 30 years and then it's offered to a new resident. I was wondering if that's something that you'd expect to see in the future here, or if we're just, that's not something that would be culturally acceptable.
I think I can take that one. In the United States, there's really only one community where that occurs, and that's in the historic cemeteries in New Orleans. And there's some certain conditions there that create an opportunity to do that. That doesn't exist in Montana. My view is that culturally that's not being done and not anticipated. And on the flip side of the discussion, when you select cremation, you have a very small remains. And so, you can do things very efficiently for the long term that are permanent, that are done well, that don't use land inappropriately. And then, of course, we as cemetery consultants have long felt that cemeteries are not something you want to just limit, because it's a tremendous permanent green space. If you build residential next to the space and you create a walking access to the cemetery, you've got the natural place to walk your dog, to take your kids. And it's completely safe. It's going to be green forever. It's not going to be something that may be converted into high rises in the future and impacting your residential investment. So a lot of people will say buying a house next to a cemetery hurts its value, but we would argue that's not the case.
Thank you. I've got 2 more questions queued up, and then we need to move along just for timing's sake. Julie.
Hi, I'm actually just curious about the question that we just addressed with the irrigation. And maybe Jeremy can answer this. Is the water for the irrigation at the cemetery, is it on its own well?
Yes, I believe that's the case. We do have our own well for the cemetery.
Okay, I guess, and just in my experience with it, there are some pluses and minuses to having an automated irrigation system whereby you can save a lot of water if you have an underground automated system installed because it just operates more effectively. So I don't know if there's maybe a little more to the cost benefit analysis there.
The only thing I would add is that when we were there, the maintenance team was incredibly impressive. Larry and I spent a lot of time with maintenance teams on a daily basis. They were frankly maniacal about the level of care of the site, and that included the water system. And so as we talked with them about their best practice, they were at such a level that we just didn't feel we could improve it with the way they work the manual system. And we in a future generation, if that's not the case, I completely agree with you. As they operate today and what they've passed down from generation to generation for its use is very impressive.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Thanks. Jordan.
Thanks. I enjoyed the presentation. Serving on city council, we sometimes meet consultants with very specialized line of work, and this is no exception here. And I really learned a lot and appreciate it. I actually got an email from a constituent a couple of weeks ago talking about alternative burial options that are emerging in some states, and watched a documentary some years ago at our local documentary film festival on the same topic. And I'm curious if you can just comment a little bit on any new trends in burial that are occurring around the country that we might just have on the horizon here in Montana.
In addition to cremation being a now common element in what's going on, because cremation is not a particularly environmentally sensitive process, the concept of green burials is widely being explored and in some ways developed around the United States. Frankly, the green burial concept is more oriented to the funeral home than the cemetery, with the use of chemicals, the metal casket, concrete vault with rebar, all those kinds of things. The cemetery component of it would be to have something that would be more easily and more quickly returning to nature, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And there are things that we could do in that respect. The cemetery that you have is entirely plotted. And so we didn't look at undoing that, but we could easily provide some literature on how that could work if you're interested in exploring the green burial concept.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. I believe it might not be permitted under state law at this time, but it would be an interesting thing to flag for future discussion.
Okay.
I agree. Thanks, Jordan. I still need a motion, and then I need to do public comments. So after Heather's comment, we're gonna move on. Heather, go ahead.
I just wanted to make the motion to adopt the strategic cemetery plan.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, Stacy, I think, was trying to do the same thing. Really appreciate this presentation, and I really appreciate everyone's question. And some of these are things I hadn't really thought about in any depth. So I'm glad that you both have. So we have a motion on the floor. There is some public in attendance. If you have any public comment on this item, please raise your hand, and whoever is on the phone, you can press *9 to raise and lower your hand. So let's see. No hands are being raised. So I think we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Karina?
Anderson.
Yes.
Anderson votes yes. Becerra.
Yes.
Becerra votes yes. Contos.
Yes.
Contos votes yes. Harp.
Yes.
Harp votes yes. Hess.
Yes.
Hess votes yes. Jones.
Yes.
Jones votes yes. Merritt.
Yes.
Merritt votes yes. Cheryl.
Yes.
Cheryl votes yes. Vaseka is not here.
Yeah, it looks like
Okay.
she's not on the list. We can mark
Not
her.
here. West.
Yes.
West votes yes. So that is 9 yeses.
Great. So that will go on the consent agenda as well. Thank you both for a very interesting presentation and getting me thinking about some things that I hadn't thought about as much as before. So really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your work on this.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on just for time because we just have a little over 10 minutes to get the rest of this done. So we have time to sterilize everything, or sanitize, I guess. David Selvage is here with easement amendment for West Broadway Island shared parking lot. David, do you want to go ahead?
Good morning. David Selvage, Missoula Parks and Recreation. I have a easement amendment request to facilitate Imagination Brewing Company use of power out at a shared use parking lot we have with them. On my screen is effectively the existing parking lot. The power is located right about where my hand is located, which is about 2 feet off the common property line. This agreement would transfer control and use of the power to Interconnect International, so that they can utilize it for some additional expansion of services at their facility. It has no material impact on the city other than we're paying an average of $5 a month to hold the lighting. I believe that Fernanda is on the line, possibly, if you have any questions for her. With that, we would recommend approval of this and direction for staff to record the easement instrument as amended.
Okay, I think that Fernanda is here. Fernanda, would you like to add anything?
Hello, good morning. I don't think so. It's pretty straightforward. We would love to take over taking care of that power line so we can provide some power to our food trucks that are outside basically every day, and try to support them and help them carry their business while we carry ours. And it's an easier and way less expensive way of providing power to them.
Great, thanks. I love the food trucks. Does anyone have any counselors have any questions? Heather.
I don't have a question, but I'd love to make the recommended motion to make this happen.
Great, thank you. So there is a motion on the floor, and I'm going to go. We only have one attendee. If you would like to make a comment on this item, please raise your hand. And if not, and if there are no other comments by council, we'll just go ahead and do a roll call vote. I didn't need to hurry us quite as much on the cemetery, maybe. Karina?
Okay. Anderson?
Yes.
Anderson votes yes. Becerra?
Yes.
Becerra votes yes. Contos?
Yes.
Contos votes yes. Harp?
Yes.
Harp votes yes. Hess?
Yes.
Hess votes yes. Jones?
Yes.
Jones votes yes. Merritt?
Yes.
Merritt votes yes. Cheryl?
Yes.
Cheryl votes yes. West?
Yes.
West votes yes. That is 9 yeses and no nos.
Great. So that passes, and that will go on the consent agenda as well. So thank you. Thank you both for being here, and that is done. So we have no other agenda items today in Parks and Conservation, and surprisingly enough, we're done a few minutes early. So we'll have a little bit of a break and give them time to get everything together. Thanks, everyone.